Police officers who have arrested other police officers, what's the story? This was during my time as a United States Marine Corps MP. Never arrested another police officer during my other gigs. Got a phone call from the guy's wife saying he was drunk and refusing to leave the house. Knocked on the front door, but found him crying on the porch about his wife leaving him because she wasn't happy anymore. She walked by the porch and motioned for me to come inside through the glass door. She proceeded to show me the red marks on her throat, the hole in the door that he punched through beside her head, and some other evidence that doesn't need to be disclosed. After asking him to come inside and get dressed, he refused to leave with me. I wasn't going to handcuff him in front of his kid, but he decided to take that moment to run from me. He was faster, and got away for about 5 minutes before I found him walking through a playground a couple building over. Caught up to him, he punched me, but was taken into custody after a slight use of force. On the way to the station he tried to kick out a window in my cruiser and told me I was ruining his life. He ended up getting charged with about 7 different charges and was kicked out of the Marines. On his way out he lied to NCIS and got an investigation opened on me for rape. Investigation was completed, thoroughly, and all charges against me were marked as unsubstantiated, but the charges still showed up after I got out and went through a background check for my security clearance. 10. Would do again. My slight inconvenience was totally worth it for him to go down for domestic assault charges. Edit for clarification, the rape charges that he falsified were by him stating that he, quote-unquote, heard Gregelstang raped a girl at the Marine Corps ball. Due to a law passed in IRC, 2013, all military sexual assault allegations have to be investigated by a Title 18 law enforcement agency, outside federal agency. NCIS was the one that took my case and subsequently cleared me. Charges are still found on a background check, even though I was cleared 100%. When I did a background check for my current agency, it caused them to do a double take a come talk to me again. I disclosed it the first time we spoke, but I don't think they saw it until they dug into it more. Still got the security clearance, still have the job, so hopefully they don't think about it. Edit. Also, as my deputy provost marshal said to me at the time, it's a bad look, but once I was cleared there was no way anyone could doubt that the charges were bullshit. They were fully investigated, over 119 days, and not a shred of evidence was found. I knew it was bullshit, my friends knew it was bullshit, and my leadership at my base knew the charges were bullshit. I just wish they could be completely removed so I don't have to explain it all. Though I don't mind explaining it, because it shows I have the courage and willpower to do what is right no matter who the client/suspect is. I think I've used it as a great talking point when asked about it. Can't go into much detail but had to book an officer in for taking his female roommate's phone and sending her nudes to his own phone. He then threatened to leak them unless she did sexual favors for him, but she called it in instead. Edit. This really blew up for me, so thank you kind soul for the silver. I would also like to apologize for spelling and grammar mistakes, it's definitely not my strongest subject. More cops need to enforce speed limits on each other. It really pisses me off when I see cop cars speeding past me with no lights on when it's clear they aren't going on a call. They're just driving. It's much less common where I am now, Washington, than it was in the South, where I am from. Get a call one night about a domestic. Upon arrival, this woman was bleeding heavily from her face. Said her boyfriend was a cop and he was in the next room. We talked to him and he tells us to how she deserved it. Had to use force on him and get him in custody. Guy had close to 8 years on, fired on the spot by IAD when they arrived. Fuck him, I have no sympathy for women beaters. Saw a true crime video where this police officer killed his ex-wife cause she was trying to divorce him and she had a really nice life insurance. He was struggling hella hard with bills and apparently the crime split the whole police department up, people who thought he was guilty versus people who couldn't believe it and thought he wasn't guilty. In the end he was caught cause he was the only one who had keys to the car she drove and the police found a paper with calculations on it that were how much he would have left over after the life insurance money paid off his debt in his house. Oh, and he was sleeping around with a coworker lol. My business got robbed by 3 teenagers once. They just stole something expensive off the wall and ran out. Anyway, I called the cops and they stayed a long time flirting with my 17-year-old employee. I had to ask them to leave, which was really weird. You know you are getting old when suddenly you are older than most the police you deal with. Anyway, one of the cops starts calling my employee at work under the guise of following up on the crime. Give me a break. I had to email him personally and tell him to never contact my 17-year-old employee again and to only come to me from now on. Was a little scary cause I never had to stand up to a crooked cop before. I'm from Brazil and I'm not a police officer, but my grandfather was. He was a colonel of the military brigade? Coronel de Polícia Militar in Portuguese. We're from north of Brazil, and in the 1960s, in my state's countryside, conflict with Native American people was very common. My grandfather told me, the titular officer for the city was capturing Timbira people protesting for their land, and torturing them. I remember he specifically saying something about kicking tied up people in their backs till they bleed, putting salt on the wounds and stepping on them with military boots. That detail stuck with me. The thing is, my grandfather's grandmother came from this aldea, I don't know the right term in English, the same ethnicity, same city, so he had a more sympathetic vision of the Native American people, more than the typical Brazilian police officer from the 60s. He saw what the police force was doing in that city, and when he got called for supervising the conflict, he arrested the guy, because he was doing that shit to men, women and children. The guy was demoted, some other guy came with the same approach and absolutely nothing changed. That's what my grandfather told me. I don't know if it's true, but it's very plausible in the scenario that I know of Brazil. I'm sorry for the broken English, guys. Edit. Hey guys, thanks for your kindness. This is Grandpa and Grandma, and the saber he promised to give it to me, but borrowed to someone and lost it forever. I'm an actual cop, so I'll give an answer. I've arrested 12 cops for DUI, 2 of which included charges of possessing weapons while intoxicated. I've arrested 1 cop for writing a check on a closed account. Another for violating protection order during a very ugly divorce. I assisted the feds on a couple tax-related arrests. I've also arrested a total of 3 cops for dereliction of duty. One of those cops was a cop who didn't arrest or conduct a DUI investigation after a crash involving another cop. All those cases proceeded in a similar fashion as other people with similar backgrounds/criminal records would have with similar offenses. The slap on the wrist is actually very common and the norm with first-time offenders. Also, the things I've found cops arrested for are generally the same things other middle-class blue-collar workers get in trouble for: issues with substance abuse, particularly alcohol, and financial problems. My career is perfectly fine. I've faced absolutely no negative repercussions from any of my peers. I'd say if you work for a large enough agency, you've probably arrested or written a ticket to a cop. I actually have had to arrest 3 separate members of the justice system this year. First, a practicing lawyer and former judge who had been utilizing his position to coerce sex from defendants. He utilized this leverage even after he was not a judge anymore. Investigation by DCI revealed he had about a dozen victims, so a warrant for his arrest was made, which I executed. Arresting a guy you used to put defendants in front of is a very odd feeling. He weaseled out of prison time and got it all suspended and put on a direct supervision probation program. Absolute horse shit. I've seen guys do way less get way more time, but it's not really a secret that money has a habit of tipping the scales of justice. Next was a prison guard whom strangled his girlfriend, then stalked her relentlessly. I actually arrested him twice because after he posted bail on the first one, he was spotted lurking outside her home only 45 minutes after being released. He's currently in on felony assault, strangulation of a household member, and felony violation of a protection order. He's still in my jail awaiting trial with a bail that has been substantially increased. I'm anticipating prison time for him, but only time will tell. Third was a city police officer. I'm a county deputy sheriff, because we received a call from a 6-year-old that his dad was in the garage doing drugs and wouldn't come out. Showed up to find 4 very young kids running around unsupervised. It was a city police officer smoking meth that he had confiscated during a traffic stop and not reported or turned into evidence. DCI took the case from us due to potential conflict of interest and have placed him in another county's jail, and I haven't heard any more about it. Hope he does time too. What kind of asshole leaves his? Important advice: if you've reported your partner to the police, and you're getting a police escort home to collect your things, stay with the escort. Going through a late orange and not waiting for your escort to catch up ended up with one of my brother's friends with a dad in jail and a mum in heaven. Not a cop but a former dispatcher who filed a complaint against another dispatcher for jeopardizing public and officer safety. This person did not like me and would intentionally withhold information and not enter it into CAD, causing me on radio to have delays in responding to officer questions. When I finally had enough and reported this person to Assistant Chief, I was sent home. 2 days later I was fired for abandoning post even though I never left. I called both the chief and the assistant chief out during my termination for this being a case of good old boys and collected my personal belongings. To this day people ask me all the time, why is it when they call 911 at this particular city they get told hold? My response is usually the dispatcher is most likely finishing their game of Candy Crush first. The thin yellow line, dispatchers, and I hear the thin blue line, cops, are to never be crossed. You're either with them or against them. Edit. I really didn't expect this to get this much attention. To those who say I should report it. At the time, yes, I should have, but I was devastated to lose that job, and my only focus was to find a new job to keep money coming in. At this point, I do not know if the dispatcher is there anymore. I know the admins have changed with retirements and mayoral appointments. There is a group mentality to being a dispatcher or a cop, but by and large most do the work because they want to serve their communities. Being a dispatcher, even for my short time, was both the hardest and also one of the most rewarding things I've done. There are calls I'll never forget, both for the sheer horror of them and also for the absolute insanity they brought forth. Thanks to all who read and upvoted this, and please take a moment to consider that. The person on the phone when you call 911 or emergency services rarely gets closure when you call. All too often when we send out the appropriate people, that's the end for us. There are calls that shake you to the core and forever you wonder, did I do everything I could and are they okay? If both try to arrest the other at the same time, is there a double arrest or a cancellation? It happened in Detroit when undercover cops posing as drug dealers arrested cops posing as drug buyers. Or these violent half-wits who almost murdered another cop. Keep in mind, this is another cop they were dealing with, who knows how you are supposed to behave to not get shot. They essentially tried to assassinate a drug dealer that just happened to be one of theirs. Not a police officer, but until the proper replies start coming in, here's a story about a police officer who got sacked for scanning a box of Krispy Kreme donuts as 7p carrots at a self-service checkout. The UK has a documentary series called 24 Hours in Police Custody. Series 6 Episode 1 covered Bedfordshire police investigating a blackmail case where it turned out that one of the DCs working the case was actually the suspect. Incredible episode and well worth a watch if you can find it. DC's name was Gareth Suffling and he was given a 3-year prison sentence. Edit. Found a link to the episode. A family member of mine, a former sheriff's deputy, bargained with a woman to let her off on drug charges if she would let him assault her at any point he so chooses. He got caught by being 30 miles from his assigned area and on dash cam with her on the hood. My father, also a police officer, put an unreasonable amount of money that he would never afford me into a lawyer to help him out in court to be let off. Edited to state his actions in a more honest and unapologetic way. Domestic violence. Not much of a story, pretty clear-cut. Luckily it was a visiting family, so not someone I knew. Other than that, I once tackled a guy who had been fighting in a bar and threw cuffs on him only to find out later he was a cop. Should have known when he immediately put his hands behind his back when I told him to do so instead of fighting me as drunks tend to do. Detained but didn't arrest him because I didn't actually see him punch anyone, and disorderly conduct has a lot of discretion involved, and I don't know who started it. Gave both parties the information needed to file charges against the other and a report was completed. Just a reminder that an arrest is not supposed to be a punishment, being charged with a crime is the issue. I think DUI is the most common. I never did much traffic enforcement. Not me but my brother. There have been a couple of DUIs that he's arrested other cops for, and a fine issued against a cop throwing a house party during lockdown. The most interesting, stupid on the part of the other cop, was arresting a cop for assaulting a police officer. If you're a cop, don't go to a club and get drunk enough to lamp your own sergeant in the face when he's on duty and there to break up the fight you are already in. It won't end well for you. Ex-sheriff's deputy here. One night on shift I had the great misfortune to overhear on the radio that a small local chief of police, the whole department was only 3 people, was not answering a radio call. So my shift partner goes out to the call that they were trying to get him to go to. And I make my way to try and locate this chief of police. On my way to the police station thinking maybe he's just asleep on the couch, I see his squad car pulled off onto the side of the road, lights going. In that moment my heart sank. My first thought was, oh no, this dude just got killed on a traffic stop. As I'm walking up to the car in a hurry, I noticed that he slumped over. I reached into the open driver's window and grabbed his shoulder to try and put my fingers against his neck to feel if he has a pulse or if his skin is still warm, and generally check to see if he is in fact still alive. That's an insane reason to fire someone, especially now when cop numbers are so low. No one wants to be a cop. Hope you found something better. It was definitely an excuse for not being a team player. I got the same treatment when I worked at a juvenile detention center, overnight shift. I was on the high-risk unit, girls who had murdered their parents or killed pets or in other ways shown that they absolutely cannot be contained in society. We were awake overnight, definitively supposed to be alert at all times. Since the girls were juveniles, we could not lock their doors. We were to check on them every hour on the hour, or they will literally kill themselves or others. No joke. I had 3 co-workers for a 12-bed unit. Day shift had a 2-to-1 ratio, 6 staff at all times, 12 staff during meals, overlapping shifts, because they now had weapons. All of my co-workers slept. And not, oops, I fell asleep because it's 2 a.m. No. Come in with pajamas and pillows, sock out at the beginning of shift. We were supposed to do rounds. Every hour, note where they were and what they were doing. I did my round, skipped 3 hours, supposed to be done by my 3 co-workers, and then did my rounds again. I reported them every single shift. For 2 years. And I became the enemy. I didn't give a fuck. The girls had ambushed a sleeping worker on another, lower risk unit, and beaten her so badly that she lost an eyeball and permanent use of her right leg. I'm not fucking around with these kids. We had cameras, it's not like the administration couldn't show I was telling the truth. They ignored it. Main point is here I got harassed by coworkers for not being a team player and waking them up to do their rounds. Nah, bitches. Team player is being a team and staying awake with me, not planning to sleep all night. But I've found, even in other jobs, that people want to get away with as little as possible while having others cover their ass. I refuse. I'm not going down with the ship into which you drilled a hole. I quit abruptly one day after I got my master's degree. I just had an epiphany, I don't have to do this shit anymore. I left that shift, left my badge and keys and told them to call me with any questions. They never did. Probably because they were in crisis. One of the super high-risk girls from my unit escaped that night, and she fucking died because she didn't have her insulin with her. If I had been there, I would not have been allowed to legally touch her. We are trained in restraints, and while I'm trained to take down someone up to twice my size, I'm not allowed to do so by myself. So I would have been faced with an escapee. I would have tried to wake up my coworkers. Previous experience showed that took a while. They would not have woken up in the 5 seconds it takes the fire escape to release, and now we are done. We were also not allowed to chase down an escaped girl. We were in the middle of Albany, New York, which is the capital. It would have made nationwide news. Her death, of course, did not. Everyone on shift got fired. Since, at that time, I was a newly licensed social worker, I would have lost my fucking license that cost me 6 years and $50,000. I'm so grateful for that urge to quit. What sort of evidence was he trying to steal? If the guns are part of a large case, it can sometimes take years for the case to go to trial. Until then, everyone just assumed the evidence is all sitting there waiting for the trial. Unless there's an audit, no one will find out for ages. And even then, people will at first assume things are misfiled or lost. Somewhat related, I was reading about how sometimes a wife will leave an abusive cop husband to go to a women's shelter. The problem is that the cops know all the shelters in their area, so sometimes they have to be sent a couple counties over under top secrecy. Yes. I was friends with a woman abused by a police officer. His officer buddies would tell him that they'll testify that she is nuts, as she sat in the kitchen with an ice pack on her black eye. To be fair, these cases, when discovered, make the news more often than the cases of officers smoothly arresting other officers with no fight, so the general public perception is skewed. After all, if it bleeds, it leads. I took a journalism class in college as an elective, and I remember an exercise where we had 5 fake articles and had to choose which 2 to put on the front page. The journalism majors all chose the fire and the kidnapping, whereas I, social work major, wanted the child abuse case. They were technically right, and graded highly, because, as the professor said, abuse doesn't get attention, and that case was closed. I was furious and no one understood why. I always remember this, and this is why I subscribe to an actual newspaper. I read it online, but I flip to the second page and beyond. Journalism is still important. The front page is attention-grabbing nonsense, though. Frankly, this is the problem with the internet. It is all front-page shit. There is no deeper story. But that is a rant for another day. Not sure if it counts exactly as asked, but 2009. I've got a background in law enforcement, so as an Army officer recovering from combat injuries I found myself as the operations officer for a post/base day/Department of Emergency Services, which included the MPs and law enforcement for the post/base. My office was across the hall from the actual MP director's office. He stepped in and asked how busy I was. I was busy but wanted any excuse to get away from the monotonous BS I was working on, so I said, "Fuck it, what do you need, sir?" He was handling a case personally and wanted another officer as witness in documentation and processing. An officer's wife had been convinced to come in by a couple other officers' wives. She was a battered mess. Face was swollen, and even though she had cleaned herself up, she was hard to look at without just getting pissed. Female officers of course did the actual inspections and physical documentation, but the director was running the investigation himself. He had called the officer in off patrol and confronted him with me present as witness. Dude tried joking off that he had just gotten drunk and a little out of control. Long 8-ish months story shortened, his case was transferred to a civilian police department for her good. Not from reprisals or anything, for benefits. He was convicted of DV, which put him out of the MPs and lost him his ability to own/carry a firearm, so he was also discharged from the military, losing his career. I believe he also served some time in a civilian jail, but not 100% sure. She was granted a divorce, and because we sent it to a civilian court and he was not court-martialed, she still got to keep divorced spouse married for over 10 years benefits for her and the kids instead of losing all benefits. Which is why it was transferred to a civilian department. I really liked that director. He did not tolerate BS from among his officers. Not a cop yet, yes I know, but this is a hilarious story. The city police department had gotten their first internet computer in the early 2000s, and one of the 2 female officers was having trouble with the computer. She had spent an hour screaming, hitting and yelling at it before pulling her gun out and shooting the computer. The other female officer, who is my sister's future mill, had to take her down and arrest her for unlawful use of a service weapon and destruction of municipal property. The charges were dropped because she asked if she could instead quit without her pension and benefits and go to therapy. Now she's been living life as a grandmother and helping kids with anger issues. Another issue, more serious. An officer, same PD, was charged and convicted of unlawfully manufacturing and selling firearms. He was building rifles and pistols and was using a pawnshop to help sell them, because they had an FFL, Federal Firearms License, and was forcing the owner to sell him parts for a cheaper price. He was also found to be selling the drugs he took off of people. The police department has taken so many hits from these incidents that the city forces them to have multiple cameras in the cars. All officers have to have body cameras they can't turn off unless they're going to the bathroom, which they have to do in the department. They also can't have their guns directly on them at their desks. They have to be locked in a safe next to their desk to deter them from pulling it out and shooting a computer. I have decided not to work there and to find employment with a department that has a better reputation, which sadly is hard. Edit. I forgot to mention, I added that the officers were female in the story because whenever the other female officer would say she worked at the department, people ask her if she's the one who shot the computer and she has to explain to them the story. Also, the officer in the second story was male. Sorry I made this post at like 4 a.m. in the morning, my mistake. My cousin works as a MP in Coast Springs. She arrested 5 other MPs for running a drug smuggling operation using dead soldiers from Afghanistan to smuggle back opiates from the poppy fields. They fucked up. They bought a bunch of nice cars and houses on an MP's salary. All told, in sting operation, 5 MPs, 15 airmen, and a half-bird call. I have many stories. My dad did internal affairs, not his choice, which I'm sure many aren't. But if anyone is interested, I could type out a couple scenarios that he was a part of. Edit. Adding the story here so people can enjoy. They ran what they called integrity tests on suspected officers, from other officers letting them know, breaking the law and abusing the badge. In one such case they put an undercover officer, he was a black officer, in a nice car from impound. Had him drive normal down a highway the suspected cop was patrolling. They would put drugs or a bag of money under the driver's seat. There are cameras and microphones placed throughout the vehicle. Upon pulling the UC officer over, they would have him exit the vehicle and search it. Once they found drugs or money, they would take a bunch and stuff it into their vest and then tell him they found nothing and he could continue on his way. In most cases this was thousands and thousands of dollars and/or lots of drugs. They allow the officer to finish his shift, and before he gets home he is arrested and interrogated. They offer him a choice. Be fired and keep your pension if he can also tell them other officers who do the same thing, cause some crowds roll together, or not say anything and be fired, no pension and possibly jailed. Either way, never be an officer again. If they honestly didn't know anyone, still lose pension. So that's one. Yes please. They ran what they called integrity tests on suspected officers, from other officers letting them know, breaking the law and abusing the badge. In one such case they put an undercover officer, he was a black officer, in a nice car from impound. Had him drive normal down a highway the suspected cop was patrolling. They would put drugs or a bag of money under the driver's seat. There are cameras and microphones placed throughout the vehicle. Upon pulling the UC officer over, they would have him exit the vehicle and search it. Once they found drugs or money, they would take a bunch and stuff it into their vest and then tell him they found nothing and he could continue on his way. In most cases this was thousands and thousands of dollars and/or lots of drugs. They allow the officer to finish his shift, and before he gets home he is arrested and interrogated. They offer him a choice. Be fired. And keep your pension if he can also tell them other officers who do the same thing, cause some crowds roll together, or not say anything and be fired, no pension and possibly jailed. Either way, never be an officer again. If they honestly didn't know anyone, still lose pension. So that's one. I'm not an officer, but the police officer that worked at my high school then was arrested by his buddies. He was messaging and trying to meet up with an underage boy for sex. Of course he arranged for a time and place to meet up. Got busted by his pals, had his picture blasted all over the news and at the high school. I was the head of the unit dealing with sexual offenses and child protection. We served a number of police precincts, called a cluster. A young woman was arrested for theft at one of the police stations that resorted under us. Her mother was the complainant. The daughter had a serious substance addiction and had previously stolen from her mother, who gave her a last warning after the second to last time. A substantial, for them, amount of cash had gone missing and, when confronted by her mother, the daughter denied any knowledge of it. So, deciding that it was time for tough love, she took her daughter to the police station, opened a case and had her arrested. Later that evening, the mother discovered that, instead of hiding the money in the inside pocket of the coat which was hanging in her wardrobe, she had inserted the envelope containing the cash into the coat sleeve. In other words, no theft had taken place. She immediately returned to the police station, explained to them what had happened, made a withdrawal statement and was told her daughter would be released imminently, but that, because the case docket was already with the detectives, only they could release her, and not the unformed police in the charge office. Enter the rotten apple of a detective. Upon hearing that a withdrawal statement had been made, he booked the suspect out of the cells and took her to his office, where he told her that he could make the case go away, if she did something nice for him in return. He then talked her into having sex with him, following which he had her released from custody. Only upon returning home and hearing her mother's profuse apology did the daughter realize what had happened. Cue the rape complaint, the case docket of which ended with me. Long story short, we summarily arrested the detective, a seasoned veteran of more than 15 years' service, recovered the used condom in his office and he was convicted. I don't remember the exact sentence, but it was in excess of 10 years. Edit. I forgot to mention something that really struck me, how quickly the arrested cop became institutionalized. There are certain mannerisms which convicts have which are hard to accurately explain but easy to spot when you look for them. It's in the way that they walk, the gait is affected by leg irons, so after a while, even when not wearing them, one can spot it when they walk. Especially when in a hurry, there's something identifiable in how they move faster using small steps. I'm not sure I can explain it better, but I was shocked to see that, after only 3 months in detention awaiting trial, some of the traits were already setting in. In my shortish time in law enforcement I never arrested another cop, although I did arrest correction officers. Both for domestic violence-related incidents. But I did have several officers I knew well who arrested officers from our agency, and even worked with a couple guys who ended up getting arrested. I only knew of one guy catching flack for arresting a fellow officer. The officer arrested was extremely well liked and the offense was pretty iffy. The kind of thing you wouldn't typically arrest a random person for. However, it came out later that it was just the tip of the iceberg. Most cops I discuss these matters with really have no issue with you if you arrest another cop for legitimate reasons. Professional courtesy is definitely a thing, an officer will likely get the benefit of the doubt. If you commit a borderline act, an officer is likely to turn their head the other way. It's called officer discretion, and most officers will do the same for nurses, teachers, other first responders, or just someone who is kind. But if you have legitimately screwed up, you are most likely going to jail. The cops exist that will do everything they can not to arrest a fellow cop, but they are definitely rarer than the public thinks. My cousin was local PD and told me a story about a fellow officer who was molesting his stepdaughter, 11 years old. They asked who was going to arrest him and all of the local PD officers refused, my cousin included. They had to call in the state police after the sheriff's department also refused to arrest. My cousin didn't understand my outrage at the story. Former U.S. Army military police officer. I never arrested another MP, but I myself was arrested by an MP in a different unit on the same post. Long story short, I just bought a Jeep and after PT one morning me and my buddies went for a ride back on the range roads at JB Lewis McCord. My platoon was on graveyard shift, so we had the day to ourselves after PT. Anyway, so my buddies and I are hauling ass about 55 miles per hour down a tank trail, which civilian vehicles are not permitted on, when I come across a hardball pavement, around a hard curve. I was going too fast to try and stop before the intersection, so I sailed through it, and just as I did, an MP unit, on duty, was on the hardball and nearly T-boned me. I immediately stopped. The MP driving jumped out of the car, ordered me out of mine, handcuffed me, and put me in the back of his car. After he got everyone's ID and cooled off from nearly being involved in a serious accident, he came to the back of the car to question me. Which went like this. MP, what unit are you in? Me, 704th MP. What are you, a mechanic or? Me, no, I'm an MP. MP, Jesus Christ, are you kidding me? WTF? Me, yep, I'm an idiot. Pretty embarrassing. MP, damn it. Slams the door. After about 10 minutes of hem-hawing with his partner on what to do with me, they decided to take me directly to my first sergeant. And so he did. And fucking walked me all the way to her office in handcuffs for the entire unit to see. At like 9 to 10 a.m. He gave me a bunch of tickets and turned me loose to her. Those tickets are still part of my federal record. I did a FOIA request, on myself, several years ago from DOD, and those were one of the documents they sent me copies of. It's the one and only time I've ever been arrested, and it was by a fellow cop. Lol. Used to work for the police and arrested a few cops. First one was my first shift ever on the beat. I was walking around the city and had a complaint about an abusive guy who was calling women sluts and yelling about how ugly they are. I wasn't too fazed. I thought he was probably just a drunk. As we walked over to speak with the guy, he started yelling about how he was in his right, and we all agreed. You can have an opinion, but just keep things quiet. It was a very simple conversation, and after taking his details to issue a ticket, he just snapped. He threw his briefcase at my partner and kicked him in the junk. Well, we had warrant for arrest, so took him down and cuffed him. As we took him down, his glasses broken on his face and cut him up a bit. Nothing major, so we took him back to the holding cell. At this point he said to me, "Did you know I have a 12-inch cock? And my real name is Joe Big Blow." We all had a laugh. I finally got some time to run his name through the system, and boom. Police inspector. This is one of the highest ranks in Vic Pol. So being an inspector, I called my boss. She came in and said, "Oh fuck, this guy used to teach at the academy, then he runs at her and tries to headbutt her. That doesn't go well, and he ends up on the ground with a big lump on his head. Someone gave him a wall to headbutt instead." After a few hours he sobered up and was sent home. The court case carried on for 3 years. I've since left the force, and he was fired shortly after that altercation. My husband arrested an officer that took in a runaway minor in exchange for sexual favors. Dude was an officer placed at the kid's school. Kid was a missing teenage boy, like 16 or 17. Cop was getting him drugs and alcohol, too. Hubs was put on the missing persons case. Once the parents reported him missing, he was supposed to have gone with friends for spring break. It was pretty fast. Like 2 to 3 days. All the kids' friends knew. Cop had a party house for minors, basically. Creep. LAPD off-duty officer pulls up next to a black man and starts racially harassing him car to car. Second guy starts returning the insults. First guy pulls his gun. Second guy pulls his gun and shoots first, killing the first guy. Second guy was LAPD also, undercover and also off-duty. Also LA, county sheriffs were notorious for seriously abusing prisoners in the jails. FBI finally decides to do an investigation and inserts an informant into the jail system. Sheriff's deputies figure it out and disappear the prisoner into the vast gulag that is the LA prison system. And 2 senior deputies go to the house of the FBI supervisory special agent in charge of the whole investigation and tell her to back off, or else. She doesn't back off. Investigation found a lot of crime and corruption by lax, such that the actual Los Angeles County Sheriff, Lee Backer, ended up in prison for a long term, such that he will probably die there. He appealed to be freed because reasons, and the judge said, "NFW, you serve the whole term, and if you die inside, too bad." Probationary officer goes on a blind double date with his roommate. Been at the racetrack drinking, so they take the train to downtown. Everyone is pretty drunk, him in particular. Maybe to entertain or show off for his date, he is acting goofy. As everyone is getting off the train, he sees some guy bent over tying his shoes. Rocket scientist decides to leapfrog over the guy, only neither of them have much balance. Probationary cop basically jumps over / on the guy and drives his face straight into the pavement because he is too drunk and the guy wasn't expecting it. Everyone jumps up and he starts trying to defuse the situation he just caused. Turns out the guy is a 17-year-old kid heading down to spend the weekend with his grandparents and has 2 broken teeth and a broken nose. The drunk cop starts saying stuff like, "It's okay, it will be fine, I'm a cop, it's all good." When he realizes the crowd isn't going to let him just walk away, he foot bails and tries to run off. A few guys chase him down and grab him. Cops get called and detain him. I was the on-call detective who was called out at 2230 to handle the case. He refused to answer any questions and was booked in for felony battery, based on the extent of injuries and age of victim. He never made it off probation and resigned. Edit. Since I saw this asked, I figured I would clarify. I wrote up and submitted the packet to the DA for prosecution. Nothing was swept under the rug. Trust me, a guy like this is not wanted on the police department. He was a probationary officer, so it would be easier to terminate him. The case was put through the system by the DA and he ultimately took a plea deal. A plea deal is very common across the entire spectrum of cases, whether it be a vandalism, theft of $1 billion, drug charges or murder. It is probably the most commonly used tool for adjudicating cases, so don't think a plea deal was arranged because he had been a cop. Remember, he was arrested and charged by the same department he was a probationary officer for. I'm impressed. I witnessed a crime once at a train station. I was like 110 pounds at the time and something broke in me and I guess I chased the guy down screaming, but I honestly blacked out, so all I know is 1 minute I saw hair flying and the next minute I was screaming at a guy. Anyways, only after he took off did this team of like 6 tall hockey players come up to ask if we were okay. Yes guys, because a tiny woman is who stopped what was happening while you just stared. I learned 3 things. Abusers are terrified of any stranger who stands up to them. I apparently have a not very healthy for me fight response. Bystander effect does happen. More info in case people are curious. I found out from the girls what happened. The guy, who they know, got mad at them for some reason and maced them. You can't even have mace where we live, but somehow he had some and he maced them. Then he started dragging the one by her hair down the platform. That is what I saw with the hair flying thing. After he went away they were both sobbing about how they couldn't see. I told them to go rinse their eyes and waited for security to show up. I explained what I saw and did to security, then got back on a train to get home. I did not get their info and have no idea what happened after.
Hey guys, this is the Rogue YouTuber here. I recently had a big change in my life. I had a baby daughter. Here she is. If you could do me a favor and remember to hit the subscribe button and bang the bell, I'm hoping to really create a YouTube channel that really gets people excited and brings people the best, most interesting content collated from across the internet. I'm saving up to save my little girl to Carnegie Mellon Computer Science Department. So please remember to like and subscribe. See you next time.